My name is Margaret Dragu, and I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And the name of my exhibit is Verb Woman, The Wall is in My Head, A Dance of Forgetting. Doesn't fit on a t-shirt. I'm extremely excited to have this exhibit at the Richmond Art Gallery. This is my first solo exhibition. I was here with another artist doing a collaborative exhibition with Pam Hall, Marginalia, which was a really exciting installation work that we did here, and there was some performance attached to it and some community interactivity with various groups. And that was fabulous, but this is my first solo, right? So I am really thrilled, and I'm thrilled it's happening in Richmond, because I lived here for so long before I moved to Vancouver, and I still work here. So I still kind of have a passport. I have sort of citizenship here. This exhibit is really different for me because I had the luxury of spending quite a lot more time preparing, editing, conceiving, experimenting, developing before I actually created the final product, and working with all my team people. A lot of things I have done over the decades have been much more short-term based, because there's like never any budget, there's never any time, there's never any money. So this is sort of a longer, this is kind of like my novel, right? I've done a lot of short stories, I've done a lot of magazine pieces, but this is my first big novel. This piece has a long history. I'm putting it under the work of Verb Woman, and I have many personas: Lady Justice, Nuestra Senora del Pan, Art Cinderella. I have many. But Verb Woman has been really prolific lately. And somewhere along the time after I finished doing the dictionary, which was 18 gerunds, verbs, action verbs based in projection, performance, and creating a DVD encyclopedia, a digital encyclopedia for the web, many of those verbs floated up as being deeply connected to the Cold War. I even went back and got some slides from the 70s when I was first visiting Berlin and performing there. And I just got incredibly obsessed with Cold War, James Bond, Jean Le Carré, rereading all those novels, listening to all of his interviews on CBC radio with Eleanor Wachtel. I was getting very hardcore about the Cold War, in part because I'm a baby boomer and we are all Cold War babies, and because I had a long relationship and still do have a long relationship with Berlin. I've seen it through many ages. So partway through of working on the dictionary, I realized I had to get back to Berlin. So I really started to campaign to get there, and I finally got some travel money to go there, and I went to Berlin. By that time, the wall had come down. And it's kind of this kind of dribbling little experience everywhere that is, like, there's little bits of copper, little insignia. This is where the wall was, and it's very faint. At the same time I did that tour, I went to Ireland for the first time, and the only place I went in Ireland was Belfast. And I grew up, besides the miners' strikes in England, I also grew up with this peace line and the conflict, and then the growing conflict through the 70s, 80s, and in fact it goes on. They have riots every July. So I wanted to see the peace line, and it was also very moving, because they seem like my walls. There's walls all over the world. I mean, I could have gone to Jerusalem, but these walls are really my walls, the peace line and the Berlin Wall. And so I got people to take me on little walks, not really sure what I was going to do with it, but when I came back to Canada and started looking at the footage, I realized, oh yes, this is the next project, is conflicts, memories and forgetting, history and forgetting, how we forget history, how we forget national history, international history, how we forget our own history, how selective history is. And I had been doing also a series of performances for Verb Woman based on my mother and my mother-in-law at that time, their demise with Alzheimer's. I spent so much time in these institutions and hospitals with people who had Alzheimer's. It became another kind of obsession. So that kind of personal, inevitable, unable to control the forgetting, and the guarded, actively forgetting that nations can due to, particularly to colonized peoples, you know, like the smallpox blankets in Canada, et cetera. There's thousands of examples across the world. Started to really feel like, okay, this is the territory for this work. And quite a while ago, I did a performance that had a lot of James Bond things in it about left brain, right brain, east, west, red, blue. And I got entranced with this German phrase, which is "the wall is in my head," which after the wall came down and after the euphoria, then there was this difficulty through the economics of dealing with Eastern Bloc people who had different ideologies around work ethic and healthcare and rent, et cetera. And there was this then depression in Berlin before it bounced back up again. So they had this cachet, this idiomatic expression that I really liked, "the wall is in my head." So the wall might be down, but it's still in me. I'm still living through those values. And I feel, as a Cold War baby, the wall is still in my head. Well, I like the word persona. I think maybe the very first Ingmar Bergman film I ever saw was Persona. Liv Ullmann, that face, and that little boy in the front, in the foreground, and his hand coming up. God, I think I saw it and I didn't have a clue what it was about, but I remembered the title, and I was very young when I saw it, but it was my first art film. So I like the word persona. And I'm interested in multiple personalities, and again, you know, Sybil was a really big book when I was growing up. And so I like all that. So there's a medical thing that I'm very attracted to about it, this sort of like assuming different secret identities, which is also like being a secret agent, about being a double agent, or being a double agent, or a double agent. But at the same time, there's a strong history in art of people using personas. The first ones I saw were certainly, you know, Dr. Brute and Lady Brute from the Western Front from the early 70s. Other people in the United States, you know, who ran for, you know, Mr. Peanut up here, who ran for mayor for Vancouver, and in Toronto, the Hummer sisters who ran against Art Eggleton, Art versus Art. So there's a long tradition of people assuming different personas, and also through their personas running for parliament and other functions. So it doesn't come out of the blue in terms of art of trying to like be somebody else. You know, basically it's an excuse to dress up in funny outfits, you know. And, you know, in the old days when I first met Dr. Brute and Lady Brute, alias Kate Craig and Eric Metcalf, I thought, oh God, these guys are so silly. I just, you know, come from, you know, working very purely in New York with my teachers, and, you know, I was, you know, doing kind of Yvonne Rainier kind of pure things, and Twyla Tharp kind of pure things, form, and, you know, like no costumes, like that's bad, smiling bad, stories bad. There were a lot of things that were bad, but we felt very free in those other areas that we were working in. But the idea of running around in a funny costume was not on. So I'm sure spent at least 2 decades thinking that I love the people on the Western Front, but I really wish they would stop running around in funny costumes. Flaky too, fabulous artist, Glenn Lewis, always running around doing, you know, slightly naughty personas, you know, like, but certainly politically incorrect, but funny as hell. But then, I don't know, one day I woke up and I just could not stop myself from putting on a funny outfit and running around and doing things. The first persona was Lady Justice, and it happened during a performance. You know, I was working with issues of revenge, equality, just starting to develop her personality and deciding to be a goddess, and having this online presence and blogging and lots of photographs, and then eventually getting 7 Vices and Virtues and making graphic novels and performances and parades. And now we work a lot with Rose, Remember Our Sisters Everywhere, and the Richmond Women's Resource Center folk, and other women from the downtown east side, particularly around the monument downtown at the Marker for Change, honoring the women who were murdered at l'École Polytechnique in Montreal, but also women and children who have been murdered or disappeared around the world. So she has a kind of flaky presence, and she has a very serious presence at the same time. I I like that she's goofy, but she's also very serious. And then once I was in really deep with Lady J, there didn't seem to be anything holding me back from getting other funny outfits, and they come organically, you know, like Verb Woman started by doing these actions of sewing and mending in the street and in stores and in storefronts and clinics and galleries around the downtown east side and then other places around the world. And the idea is that I fix something for someone and then they choose a button from my button box and then I sew it on my black apron so that, you know, the idea is eventually I'll be like a Pearly from London, you know, dressed all with all these buttons, which I thought would be like a minute. But you know, it takes a lot of sewing and fixing to get that apron filled up. I've still got a long way to go. I have been an artist for at least 4 decades, long time. I started as a dancer. Modern dancer is what we used to be called, contemporary dancers, and a choreographer. In dance particularly, but also in theater and music and visual art, there are opportunities to look for new things, and generally in that process or in that desire to look for new things, you either use improvisation techniques or chance operation techniques. That's a big generalization, but generally that's how you challenge yourself in some way. We think of it as coming from John Cage and Merce Cunningham, and certainly John Cage is the best known in modern history, but it predates him with something called aleatory music, which goes way back into, you know, harpsichord time and sonatas. I don't know, when is that, 1500, something like that? So tinkle, 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 tinkle. So the idea of having a system, a chance-based game-like system in place to make choices so you can discover new things is as old as the hills. So aleatory music kind of fed into John Cage looking at it more in terms of visual art, and then of course Merce Cunningham followed using space and repetition and other choices, directional choices through dice and the I Ching, etc., for dance to have a companion version of that, which is making these decisions that are not from the ego. So John Cage is famous for saying that he didn't like improvisation because people just brought what was their most comfortable things forward, or the things that they're the best at, which is certainly, as a beginning improviser, that's certainly what you do. Whether you're playing the oboe or you're tap dancing, you bring your best, you bust out your best rhythms first, right? What you know and you think you're good at. But chance puts you into another place where you are going to be much more uncomfortable and much less knowing. And that means you do have the opportunity of surprising yourself. So I use all those techniques off and on in things that I do, especially if I'm working or collaborating with other people. And that's why I have 7 or 8 decks of cards, which are used as one of the devices to help make the choices so that we can start making something. It gets you out of yourself. So I find it very exciting. So I'm encouraging people to do a little chance operation with me as a process part in the gallery, which I'm calling The Artist is Working. So whenever I show up to work, and even when I'm not here, I'll be working, really. People can participate in several ways. Well, 2 ways. They can either do sound. They can give me a little sound clip, a 30 or 60-second sound clip from their camera or their phone or their smartphone or their stupid phone or whatever kind of peripheral device they happen to be running around the world with, highlighting sound. So it's those I'm looking for them to send in interesting sounds from their life, which could be their morning coffee bubbling in their coffee maker, or it could be the SkyTrain station, the voice saying, you know, we've arrived at Brighouse, terminus, or their baby laughing, or there's lots of sounds in the world, but we're looking for the way John Cage looked at the world as this infinite resource and universe and symphony that's going on all the time. He's famous for saying that he just loves the sound of traffic. You know, he doesn't want to hear any classical music compositions. He would like to hear the sound of traffic. So just choosing real life sounds, 30 to 60 seconds they can send to me, and I will put that together for a soundtrack, which will be parallel to Cunningham and Cage, dance part that people can also help direct me with choosing verbs to put a little sequence together, which I will shoot, and then by chance we will put them together. So that's an experiment that I'm doing, and for me, I'm hoping to do it without being, as I call my messy self, starting to improvise on top of it and doing all the kind of ego stuff that I love to do. I'm going to try and be clean and see where this community, I'm calling it a community quilt, that what our quilt looks like if I just don't mess with it too much.